This is Great Lean Leaders Making the Business Case. I'm Dr. Shannon Flummerfelt, and I'm here with the wonderful Dr. Jessica Jannaman. She works for TE Connectivity and is the Global Director of Health Safety, and I'm sure all things sustainability related. Welcome back, Jessica. It's great to have you here for your round two interview.
Yeah, great to be here again. I really enjoyed the last conversation, so look forward to this one.
Very good. So let's get started. I wanted to continue to go into more depth around your lean leadership practices. And if we could start with data-driven decision making, the use of data is just fundamental to lean, and it's really up to the lean leader to take that on and ensure that data-driven decision making is occurring. Can you share with us how data-driven decision-making works in your world and the lean leadership work that you do? Like there's tons of data, tons of reports to read, all that kind of thing. But what does that mean, and how do you fold that into decision-making? So having the data is one thing, analyzing the data is another thing, and then actually figuring out how to use it in decision-making is kind of a third thing. So can you walk us through what that looks like for you?
Sure, yeah. So data for me is probably the most critical because it helps you and your team focus on the true north. It points you in the right direction, and you have to have data to tell you, am I moving the right way? Where is, my main focus need to be? But you also have to struggle with this concept of paralysis by analysis, right? Sometimes too much data can be a bad thing. And so I think as a lean leader, one of our roles is to, and my role is to help the team with saying what is the true north and what are the leading indicators that are going to help us to get there. Especially with safety. Safety, there's so many different facets you can look at. You have predictive analytics. You have analytics that are key indicators, right? Key performance indicators. So a good example of one is I might be walking through a facility and I almost trip and fall, right? Well, why did that happen? And so I look at that and say, oh, there's a cord on the floor. That's why I almost tripped and fall. That little piece of data is in what we would call something like a near miss, where I almost fell and got injured, would be a leading indicator for us. And saying, okay, now I can do a further investigation and direct the team into understanding why did that happen? What's the root cause, right? And this is where you can leverage some of the lean tools to help you. But how do I do that on a macro scale? So for me, I have almost 60 sites globally, right?
Mhm.
And so the real challenge with this is that I might have the one variance, the thing that's out there that could cause a very severe injury to occur, the worst injury to occur, right? Or even a fatality. And so there are those different incidents that could occur, like it could be a near miss, or it could be a first aid, right? Where in terms of, yeah, I just bumped my knee, right? But what if I fell forward and there was a sharp table in front of me? That turns into a more severe incident. So with safety, it gets to be very tricky and how to look at this. And the way that I try to leverage these different data points is through looking at just in that factor. One, we have to look at the leading indicators. So the things that are telling us, this could have happened. This could have been much worse. And we take into account severity as one of those and setting criteria and definition around that, which we call serious injury and fatality potential, or SIF. The other piece of it is to look at the actual incidents where we saw a more severe outcome, like maybe there's stitches involved or something worse, right? So it's a little bit of this balance, but when guiding the team, it's important that you can't disregard data, but you have to pick and choose. Where do we see the systemic issues? And I always say to the team, where are we going to get the most juice for our squeeze? We can't ignore these factors. However, where should we spend the majority of our time focusing? Because there is only so much data, and you can get in the weeds and get into that paralysis by analysis. So I think as a lean leader, it's really, and it can be difficult to get to that point. You sometimes have to look at the data and say, what are we trying to achieve? What are the systemic issues? What are the variances, the things that are single cause failure, right? And understand what the probability and the likelihood of those are as well. So data to me is crucial, it's key. And I also think it's tapping into data that sometimes you didn't think about, right? And using a little bit of creativity. And I'll give you an example where we started to look at quality defects and we've started to look at downtime and equipment and how that overlaps with safety. And the reason that's important, because if you think about downtime, you're typically stressed, you're typically rushing, you have non-routine activities that are going on. And so we'll look at that and say, is there any sort of correlation between safety influence in here? Did we see any injuries as a result of these types of increased activity? Same thing with quality. Typically when you have more quality defects, you have more challenges. Operators are just trying to get through the day. They're just trying to do the job. And if they have equipment that's constantly jamming up, or there's other leading factors that's causing a quality defect, well, we know that there's going to have some sort of influence on the safety because you're exposing people more to more risk and hazard. So we've recently tapped into that pretty well and have done some AI collaborations in that with our team. But long story short, again, I think data, it's so powerful, but don't let it consume you because it can be overwhelming, right? So
Yeah. So, you've mentioned the, huge number of employees you're in charge of and the number of sites globally. So how do you handle disagreements or maybe different perspectives on the data? Do you have any tips you can share with us about how to get to any form of high agreement or consensus around, what is actually happening here and getting to the root cause and having some agreement on that?
yeah, so it's a good question. I think we do have disagreements in data, and I think a lot of it is, again, picking out those systemic issues, the number, and what is it telling us? Where do we see the systemic issues in terms of the types of near misses we're having, or the types of incidents we're seeing versus I've got this one incident that happened, and I'll give you an example. We just had an occurrence in our site in Australia. They had an occurrence with a poisonous spider. And now that's an important data point from a potential severity aspect.
Mm-hmm.
But and I just had this conversation with one of the EHS leaders, and they were saying, well, we really have to come up with a protocol and a system and everything. I said, I agree with you. We have to respond to this and we have to respond effectively. But am I about to spend a ton of hours and, people to focus on poisonous animals? I don't think it's really, you've got these clusters, right, of data, and you've got to be able to identify that, yes, this is a cluster, but it's not where I'm going to get the most juice for my squeeze. And that's the question I always go back to with people, to kind of guide those conversations. We're not disregarding this. We're not saying this is not important, but what is it telling us from who's it going to impact the most, right? And at the end of the day, we have to be able to impact the majority of the population. So
Yeah, I think that's definitely interesting. And, kudos to the worker who said, let's do something about this. Like you say, the thinking is right, but maybe so the data part is right, the decision-making part is, has to be put into context, and all of these certainly do. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. And yeah, I think spiders would make most of us quite nervous and unexpected. I don't know if a poisonous spider could be considered a black swan in one of your factories, but
We-
but it could be close. Who knows?
Yeah, it's never a dull moment. Yeah, and like I said, it does happen. We had a cobra get in one of our sites in Morocco, and
Oh,
you got to have protocols. It's again,
yeah.
you're not disregarding it. You have to address it. But
Mhm.
is that couple sites or is that 60 sites, right? So
Right, right. Yeah. So, I mean, there obviously has to be some autonomy at the sites, as much as you go for standard operating procedure, and those routines that you talked about, right? But
yeah.
still, there's there has to be some empowerment there to make that work. So that's great. Let's switch to communication. You're just a fantastic communicator. And I know you have several examples of tools and visuals and things like that you use to help communicate project charters and benchmarking and visual aids on benchmarking, even outright communication plans. So can you talk to us about your keys to successful communication and the impact of lean within the communication competency and what that looks like in the workplace?
Sure, and I appreciate the compliment on I'm a good communicator because I quite frankly I feel like I have to try really hard at communication. And it's something that I feel like quite honestly always an area of improvement. Because I think there's always opportunities with communication. So appreciate that. But
You're welcome.
yeah, and so for me with communication, I think it's probably one of the most critical and important things that you can have as a lean leader, be strong in as a lean leader. And I constantly work at this. How can we better communicate? How can I better communicate? And especially with lean leadership, communication removes ambiguity. And with lean, it should be very direct what I'm trying to convey and what I'm trying to get at every level in the organization. If I can read something or see something in 2 minutes, I understand it, right? And that's extremely important with safety. So for me, it's about making sure you have everybody clear what their role and their expectation is. And also identifying your audience. So when I started at TE a little over 2.5 years ago now, that was one of the first things I did is I reached out to communications, but I also spoke to my team. And I just did a current state. I did a map of what is our current communications, right? So it's with lean, you have to identify a current state. If you don't do that, it's very difficult to, one, make sure there's transparency and ambiguity is removed. The other piece is, how do we improve things, right? And like I said, with communication, you should always be looking to improve and see what you can do better. I personally do that. And so coming into the team and kind of getting a current state, I don't think the team really understood how many communications we were doing, what were we communicating, who was the audience, how we were doing it. And so some of the examples that I've provided in the past is really a summation of that. It's identifying the who, the what, the how, the when. And that is extremely important to me. And I think to teams because everybody can read that in a summary, in 2 minutes and understand, okay, I get this. This is the who, the what, the how, the where. Even a RACI, right? RACIs are very good at doing that. It's a communication tool. And so for me about how you put together that communication plan is a critical step. And also, it removes a lot of the waste because if you are, and a good example is, there were reports being sent out continuously, but who was reading these reports? why were we generating them? Who was the audience, right? And what you find is that people are just communicating things because they were told to do so once in the past, and it's really not effective anymore, or nobody's using this information. So that communication plan always helps you go back to the basis and get a steady ground to say, okay, are we really doing what we're intending to do? And it helps you to get an understanding of current state, future state, what needs to change, what needs to improve, and the effectiveness of it as well, I think, is a key part of that. So.
Yeah, I think that's great. Is there like a really great communication moment or event you could share with us to bring some of those ideas home? Or maybe one that was, lessons learned that wasn't so great that you look at and say, well, I could have done a lot better.
I think of the one when I did come into TE, and this was a positive, where I put together our communication plan again, just it was within three or four slides. I said, here's the who, the what, the when, the where, the how. Here's the tools we're going to use. Here's who's the champion for this, and the process, right? And so that, I mean, the team was really wowed, and even my communications people were really wowed by this. And I said, well, to me, this is just, we're already doing this stuff. All I did was capture it, right? And maybe finessed it a little bit or got some clarity on it. Things where it's gone really bad. Working in a global organization, things can be translated differently. And I think you always have to be careful about, making sure you survey your audience, because sometimes things don't always come across the way you intend it to, right? And we see this all the time with, like emails too. You can read a tone in an email, right? And we joke about it, but there's no tone there, right? But people take it differently. So a scenario that comes to me is that we had translated and communicated pretty massively one of our safety communications, and come to find out that in a certain language, Italian, it didn't quite mean some of the phrases that we wanted it to. And they said, this is actually a really bad word. And we went, oh, okay, but that taught me a lesson. And that meant, okay, I need to be more inclusive of my diversity of my team, to make sure we do a proofread before this happens too. Yeah, so that was kind of a funny one, but not so funny, in terms of, but an important point when you're working in a very diverse environment. So
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, the power of communication is so great. It's just foundational for lean leadership and, of good communication, effective communication. And so, yeah, it's good when you can at least sit back and laugh about it. That's great. So if we were to switch to another area of what we might call soft skills within your lean leadership portfolio, the idea of zero defect thinking is, of course, foundational also to the lean principles, where you're making decisions about how highly developed you want to get in your critical thinking in terms of understanding the full system, seeing deductive analysis with the root cause, understanding, are we at zero defect? Is this what it looks like? Are we on a Six Sigma model? What does it look like? So can you share with us, tell us about your thoughts on zero defect thinking and critical thinking within your lean leadership practice?
yeah, so I think critical thinking and zero defect is probably one of the more challenging, and it's because it takes the most patience. When you have a culture that is focused on zero defect and critical thinking, it's about taking the people along with you, in my mind, and really pushing and keep going back and asking, well, that's not exactly zero defect. How do we dig a little bit deeper? Right. And that can be challenging for people, but also teams to do that and shift that paradigm. Within safety, we're always focused on zero defect because you want zero incidents. You also want to make sure that you have your systems designed and your processes designed. Ideally, everything you've eliminated the hazards and the risk out, and that is a defect, right? And so even going through different incident reviews and pushing for root cause analysis, having to challenge teams to go back and say, well, how can we do this different? What can we do different? We haven't got to that zero defect state, and taking people along for the journey. And I think as a leader, you have to be able to show and tell in that aspect. And, you know, everybody wants I was just having this conversation yesterday. Everybody wants a simple solution, and everybody wants immediate results and wants to see culture and people shift and change immediately. And that's not the reality, right? So to me, it's about show and tell, and it's about coaching. And case examples to me are the best. When you can put a case example up in front of a team, especially for something that's already happened, and ask them to walk through how they would root cause this. What would they do to design out or eliminate, right? And then coming to the answer or the reality and saying, well, this is how we actually did it, right? And showing them a little bit on that. So I think there's a lot of development that goes into critical thinking. And there's a lot of, like you said, soft skills, right? Eye-opening type of scenarios. And it does come with leadership principles, because you have to be patient. You have to have that emotional and social intelligence to understand, to ask the right questions, to see who you're going to approach, make sure you identify the right people. And you know, and we speak about communication. How are you effectively going to communicate and ensure that you're getting down to that absolute root cause, right? It's hard to teach patience, right? So yeah, I think it's a lot of show and tell.
Yeah, I think the show and tell is a great tip. And you know, I think the key point here you're talking about is, you know, it is a journey for people, because there has to be that right culture and that safety. To move into zero defect thinking, you're questioning the status quo, you're looking at things through a different lens, you know, where the waste walk is heightened, and all of that awareness is heightened. And there is definitely a lot to it. So thanks for sharing that with us. You had mentioned, and I'm not sure I understood this term, did I hear you correctly earlier when you said we do AI collaborations? Is that what I heard you say? Do you mean artificial intelligence collaborations? Is that what you're describing, or something else?
Yeah, so yeah, no, you're correct. So artificial intelligence, and this is something that is a little bit newer in the safety world, I'll say, or maybe not completely new, but it's a very powerful tool for data, right? And I use it specifically in the aspect of leading indicators. A good example is there's systems out there, and we're leveraging different data for where we have forklifts that have aisleways, and they have to stay in the aisleways. Now we have monitoring systems that will tell us when a forklift leaves an aisle, and that's through AI. And that data is collected and brought up to us and saying, you had 10 instances where a forklift drove out of the aisle. It didn't hit anybody, it didn't hit anything, but you know, it could have been an incident, right? Because we know there's parameters set there. And so going back and doing that investigation and understanding, why did we have these 10 occurrences, right? So that's one example where we've leveraged AI. Another would be when you have equipment that you're monitoring, and you've got communication from equipment that's being shut down every, you know, 10, 15 minutes. And we just had a scenario at one of our sites where we had 40 instances in a shift, which is over the course of 8 hours, where the equipment was shut down due to a defect or something occurring. So we took this data from a machine output standpoint and asked the question, why is this happening? Well, we recognized there was a bottleneck and a process issue here, but every time that shutdown occurred was an exposure to our people, a potential exposure for a risk. And so, yeah, with safety, we're using a lot of AI data. We're digging into this from a data analytics piece. And we've actually recently assembled a whole team, a cross-functional team between IT and we have like 5 or 6 data analytics people on it, HR, operations, EH&S, and we're looking at these AI opportunities to see where we can tap into some of these leading indicators to support us.
Is there anything else besides AI within the, brilliant manufacturing industry 4.0 sector that you're finding particularly helpful?
I mean, data is always a part of it, right? But
Yes.
I think you have to keep up on technology. And technology can make or break you in an organization and manufacturing, and good and bad. I remember when collaborative robots came out and everybody wanted to use collaborative robots. And I was actually a part of the first team at FCA to install a collaborative robot in a plant. It was, yeah, we put in a collaborative robot, but was it the best place to use that? I don't know. But to the same opposite of that, where I've seen collaborative robots be extremely successful and eliminate ergonomic injuries, right?
Right.
So I think what I find within manufacturing to be the most helpful is you have to be able to have that driven as a value, that you are going to be technology based, setting the appropriate resources to make sure you have people that are constantly looking at this, because you're never going to be able to keep up with technology. And there's so many different examples. It's hard to pinpoint just one. But I honestly think that, the more that you look at some of the AI technologies or the automated technologies, that's really where you kind of skyrocket in terms of manufacturing. So, but you have to make it a value, and you have to appropriate people to constantly be looking at this and looking for solutions. So.
Yeah. Do you ever think there will be an AI lean leadership robot that would replace someone like you?
Oh,
Do you think
geez,
that's in our future, or is that too far off?
that's a good question. I think what's going to be challenging is when you, as a lean leader, sometimes you have to get creative on things and think outside of what would be the probability or the norm. I think with AI, it's very statistical, right? So it's based 100% on statistics and analytics. And so when you're looking at leadership development, it's difficult to, I guess, produce an AI that would have those lean leadership values instilled, right? And you have to get creative as a lean leader, and you have to be able to recognize emotionally and socially what to do in certain scenarios.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I know some of the work that's gone on with the digital twin, it started originally just being focused on the physical, something physical, a physical thing, which again is binary, it's on or off or whatever the states are. And now actually there's movement going into the behavioral sciences, and that'll be very interesting to see what that all looks like. So I don't know, maybe instead of you traveling all over the world to your factories, you might have a digital twin in Australia. And There's no more poisonous spiders in your future. Who knows?
Oh, that would be nice. I would love to have a twin to help
There
me
you
with some things.
go. There
Uh,
you go. So, all right, let's go on. And since we're talking future forward with technology and so on, what are some of your hopes and some of your goals and vision for your employees, your teams, your organization? Where are some of the gaps in terms of potential and what is possible yet to do in the organization? How do you see that?
Um, so for me, I guess I take a step back and I look at different lessons learned, and I look at TET as a very large organization. And typically within larger organizations, you have greater silos, right? Because it's difficult. Everybody is kind of stuck in their own little aspect. And so whereas in smaller organizations, you typically have a little bit more cross functionality because you're forced to with the leveraging the resources. So I think for me, it's part of finding that happy in the middle place of where you can truly break down silos. You can have some of these critical thinking sessions, conversations, right? With different functions. And so I think to me, that's really one of the more critical aspects because there's so many different valuable outputs of that. One is you develop your people. And I'm very grateful for my background, being that I did have a pretty diverse background. I took on safety, environmental quality, operations, a lot of different facets. And I think when you have that diversity of exposure, it builds better teams because people can relate, they can put each other or put themselves in each other's shoes, and they can understand the different needs. So that's one of my biggest thing. And that's why it's funny when you bring up AI and lean leaders. And I find it difficult for something like an AI technology to recognize that
Yeah.
and say this is a need because that doesn't that comes with the human interface, right? It's you're not going to be able to really, unless maybe sometime in the future there is some sort of technology that can identify that. But if I look at my role and I think as you grow in an organization, you focus primarily on working with people and seeing the needs of people. As you grow as a leader, you might take that 10% technical, right, hat, and then majority of my day is working 90% with people and resolution, right? And so I think in order for our company and I think really any company to grow, you have to recognize, is this a need and what do we do to empower this and build it, right? Really take advantage of the fact that we can put people into different scenarios and build different learning environments together so that we're getting that diversification and that true critical thinking mentality.
I think that's great. So we've got a chance to get to know you as a lean leader through these interviews, and your strengths seem obvious to me, and I'm sure just to the viewers as well. But what would you describe as some of your greatest strengths, and how do those strengths impact your organization? Can you give us like a scenario or an example of how that works? So what is it that you do really well?
Well, I think one thing that I try to do, I'm kind of a modest person. I don't like to say what are your greatest strengths and values? But I think one thing that comes to mind, and I had somebody say it to me as early as today. They said, "Are you always this level-headed?" It was a very emotional issue, it was a very touch and go issue. And I said to myself, well, it doesn't really help for me to get emotional over things because it changes your perception. And so somebody can try to upset you as much as possible. It can really, hurt you or whatever, but take a step back, take a breath and level set and say, well, am I thinking with emotion or am I thinking with logic in this perspective? And I always try to take the emotion out of things in a lot of ways and try to think about what is the right path, right? And I think that sometimes I've seen it where it can get the worst of some people. And being in quality, when I did, I had customers that were maybe not so happy with me. I had to really develop that talent to sit there and kind of level set what's the best path for this situation, right? So I
Yeah.
guess reflection, I guess that would be a good way to say it. Reflect before acting. And I think that is something that again, you have to kind of coach through scenarios, and it can absolutely help anybody in an organization.
Mhm.
Because we're being empathetic, we're being compassionate, we're being logical in our mindset. So I guess that's one thing I would say that I think I try to do. I try hard at, but I think I do pretty well. So
Yeah, very good. I would agree with that. I've never seen you lose your cool at all. For sure. So that's great. In turn, then, what are you most proud of as a lean leader in your current position or in your company now? What are you most proud of? What happened? What were the results? Can you take us through that journey and what the result was?
yeah, that's a good question. So obviously, my goal is to make sure we don't hurt anybody. And I don't feel like we've gotten to that stage yet where I can say we have been 100% successful, right? But what I can be proud of is that we have made a lot of progress, and we've been more successful in not injuring people. But, we always try to get to that target of zero, and that zero defect, right? But the one thing that I think I am the most proud of is how I've seen our team grow and how I've seen people respond. So I've had, and I've had comments from different people on my team, and they say, nobody's ever asked me these questions. Nobody's ever shown this much interest in me or cared about my professional development as much. And to me, that makes me really happy, because I think when you have people that work for you in an organization, their personal interest, their professional interest, it needs to be at the forefront. And if it's not, it's going to reflect and show. So I feel that within our organization, and one of the things that I've helped to transcend a little bit with us is to really create a focus on that. And I'm very proud of that, because culturally you do see a happier, healthier workforce, right? Whether it's at the management level all the way to the shop floor.
Mhm.
Because it's something that resonates. It's a
Mhm.
ripple effect. When you show an interest in somebody, and you're trying to show that personal professional development, or personal or professional interest in somebody, that will carry on. That carries on to others. It's contagious, right? So, but you have to put the structure, you have to put the value there. And you have to make sure that you are having the conversations with people in order to shift that culture in that way. So,
Yeah, I think when you see it cascading, as you said, both up and down the organization, then you know it's starting to become a part of the kata, the routine, the DNA of the culture. So that's really exciting. So there must be things I know, of course, in the area of health and safety, concerns, right? So is there something that, that one or two things that you're most concerned about as a lean leader, some of the worries you might carry with you, some of your most perplexing challenges? What does that piece of this work look like?
so for me, I think dealing with safety, it's when people ignore things, or they walk by things and they don't address it, or they're afraid to, and that tells me culturally that's not where we want to be. And so that is something that is constantly having to look at and have conversations with people. We do focus groups with people on certain topics. We look at data to help us with these topics. But it's one of those things that you're still, you've got the human element, right? And you can't always ignore, you can't always design that out. There's always going to be that human element interaction. And so that's one of the biggest challenges is how do you influence the behavior? How do you make a value or a belief instilled in somebody? And I do think it's part of that positive culture and that reinforcement and having those conversations. But also, you have to have these eye-opening moments with people to take them along for the journey because they don't always recognize it. And a good example is I was in Mexico a couple weeks ago, and I took a team out to the floor, and we were looking at different observations. And it was specifically looking at slips, trips, or falls because it's a challenging hazard when you've got 100,000 people in a workplace right across all different aspects. And one of the things that we did was an observation of people walking up and down the stairs. And this might seem something very simple, but when you fall down the stairs, it can be catastrophic, right? And it can be terrible. So, and it's 100% behavioral driven. It's not, what else can you do? You can't eliminate the stairs, right?
Right.
So unless you put in elevators everywhere, but I just sat with the team there and they thought it was kind of silly. They're sitting there with me and I said, no, just watch. And we watched people walk up and down the stairs. And I said, we're not looking necessarily for the negative behaviors, but we're looking for the positive behaviors. I said, we want to thank people for not being distracted, not talking on their phone, using the handrails, right? And so trying to do this positive reinforcement from a behavioral aspect rather than the negative safety cop. Hey, you weren't holding the handrail, you were talking on your phone, etc. So to me, that's one of the biggest struggles. But it's 100% influenced from leadership and conversation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think that's great. If the leader doesn't step into that and own that, right, and share that and convey that and engage the other employees in it, the employees aren't going to do that, and it's way beyond their auspice. So that's a really good one. And that can be expanded from, just being thought of as like a generic example of what leadership does
yeah.
to anything, besides stair safety. So that's great. If you were to tell us something that you want to improve in your lean leadership practice, what does that look like, and how do you go about, or how are you going about improving it?
So I am a lifelong learner. I think I always will be a lifelong learner, and I think everybody should have that mentality. So I'm constantly looking at ways I can improve myself through learning. But I think listening is one of those bigger ones that sticks out to me because I personally struggle with the focus on how to, and it goes back to communication, how can we listen better or truly hear what people are trying to say and take that in and reflect and respond on it. And so things that I do, I constantly read, I constantly search for leadership development, looking at that emotional, social intelligence growth. Listen, and they talk a lot about listening. They talk a lot about, have you heard, and what type of communication have you heard, and what are your people really saying, right? So that's just one that comes to mind to me, but I honestly think the professional and continuous growth is one of the biggest for me that I will always push for. And even furthermore, I got asked, my husband, it was funny when I finished my doctorate, he said, so what are you gonna do now? And he's like, and I said, I don't know. And I had to sit there and I had to think for a minute. And I thought to myself, well, maybe I'll go to culinary school, right? And he's like, culinary school? And I said, yeah, I'm looking for ways to continuously challenge and improve myself. I'm not doing it for professional recognition or anything, but I think this is an opportunity, right? And so I think you always have to have that mindset of, I'm always going to improve. I'm always going to develop, grow, and I'm always going to do it, to the best of my ability. I'm not going to hold back on anything. So.
Yeah, that's great. So, would you say, is there anything else besides, listening and learning, is always a constant challenge out there? If you think about your daily life in the role that you're in as a lean leader, are there barriers that are shared that you are, you kind of run into every day, every week, that just seem very common? Do you have any insights that you could share with the audience on just typical daily barriers for a lean leader?
Sure. So I think I find this more prevalent in now after COVID, with the world that we work in. There's not a lot of limits to, separate our personal and professional life. And so I think as a leader, you have to work really hard because, if you think about it from a leadership and executive level, working around the clock nonstop, right? That's kind of what we set out to do, right? And it's habitual, and I'm poor at it as well, right? And I'm probably one of the last people that should be talking about this, but I recognize it as an issue. And I think sometimes that's part of it as a leader, where we have to be able to recognize there's an issue. And that's a barrier, because when you work in a global organization, you get hit around the clock, not, all the time.
24/7, right?
Yeah. And I think part of it is putting in that standard work, communicating that standard work. And also you have to be strong enough to take a stance when people try to push past those barriers, right? Is it acceptable to be sending an email at 3 o'clock in the morning? I had a guy from India just call me at 2 p.m. I said, it's almost midnight, or 1 a.m. your time.
Mhm.
I said, what are you doing? And oh no, it's fine. I said, no, it's not fine. You should not be calling me. And sometimes you have to be that, that person. And I'll be honest, that is probably one of the biggest barriers I face on a day-to-day basis, and having to I say keep it real with people, right?
Mhm.
Because you have to recognize that burnout happens to people. And it's very real. Post-COVID, I find it more prevalent than anything else. And I work in manufacturing. We go around the clock nonstop.
Yeah, right. You're always running. There's always something in operation, right?
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Also the post-COVID observation is interesting as well, because, we all thought it was pretty bad pre-COVID. So if you think it's worse, that's really definitely noteworthy. So, as you face all these challenges and so on, can you describe for us what, like, the ideal lean leader is? What do they do every day or every month? What does that practice look like?
So for me, I think from a lean leader aspect, again, it's that balance, demonstrating that you have to show some of that personal aspect. And what I mean by that, and I spoke about this in the last session, where I had a very influential leader that taught me, that soft skills comes first, right? And that there is a separation in personal versus work. And if you don't have that balance, it's not good. And every lean leader, every good leader that I know, they impact that. They show that as a value. right? So I guess values would have to be one of the things you have to demonstrate. You have to actually have certain values, and then you have to demonstrate them, right?
Mhm.
And part of that is the personal balance. So that to me is an ideal lean leader, is that somebody that grasps that and can demonstrate that. The other is being able to uh, implement some of the standard work, right? Like, and it's sometimes this is very difficult because a lot of times we think of standard work as operations or out on a manufacturing floor, and it's hard to influence this into our daily lives, right? But it also helps with that balance too, right? With that personal and professional separation. So I think the more that lean leaders can demonstrate the standard work and communicate that to their employees, that's helpful, because you're showing and growing them that there's consistency and expectation.
Yeah.
The other thing that I'll say too is that good lean leaders, you have to be able to communicate effectively. And we spoke about communication, but I do truly think if you're missing that, it's going to be challenging, and you have to get creative in some of the tools that you look at as well with that effective communication. So those are some of the things that stick out in my mind. And I know I spoke about a lot of the lean leaders in our last session, that were personally mentors to me, and I thought demonstrated. But those are just some of the things as I think about their character and their, why I think they're such good leaders. Those are some of the things that just, are repetitive. They do that. They're consistent across every one of those mentors and leaders.
Mhm. I think that's interesting, because then it's truly modeling. I mean, it's an authentic presentation of leadership when you see the consistency in it and the kata or the routine around it. And again, the use of leader standard work in so many different ways is just so critical. So let's get on to one of the purposes of this book, Jessica, which is making the business case for lean leadership. It's obviously a combination of, soft skill development, some technical competency, some work experience, some life experience, and all of that, comes together. So it's not just all of the sudden, uh, you know, oh, I'm going to go get a degree in lean leadership. I mean, you can do that. And, that's how we got to know each other. You were in a graduate program at Oakland University for lean leadership, but it's so much more than that. It's definitely a process, and there's always challenges present. But there must be a reason that people like you would go on this journey. What is the return on investment to pursue lean leadership?
Yeah, and I think it's different for everybody, right? For me, I got introduced to lean and I was hooked immediately because I saw how much value it added into every aspect. Didn't matter what career you were going into. I mean, like I said, I've worked in safety, quality, operations. You can apply lean everywhere. And it has that return on investment in terms of being able to apply the tools, the leadership skills. And it is a journey. It's a journey of you going through learning the tools, learning the leadership style, having those mentors, having those people to guide you on that path. And it's from an ROI standpoint, it's difficult for me to describe because it's a no-brainer. But I think, and I face this all the time with safety too. If somebody were to say, well, what's the ROI on safety? And you say, well, nobody got hurt, right? Well, how do you put a value on that?
Yeah.
Well, there's ways you can do that, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I would say first and foremost, you're focusing on the right things for the right reasons, right? And it goes back to those values too. And so for me, it's about how can you continue to develop? How can you continue to grow? And you've got such a diverse set of skills and tools that you can apply to anything. And I
Mhm.
think that's proven over and over again. And you can see that through the growth and development on with people on their lean journey, right? And you can actually measure that. So I think part of what I would say in order to help with your ROI case, you have to track the progress. Track, and I wish I would have done this when I was going through more of my lean journeys, but just simply recording what you've done. If it's building a portfolio, and Oakland taught us this, right? Build your portfolio through your courses and development. Um, show what you've done, show what your progress is. And I look back to some of the projects I did 10 years ago, first getting in the lean, and I thought, and I think to myself, wow, look at how far I've come and the progress on these projects, right? So you can't ever, I think, put a number on learning and development or professional development, but what you can show is that your skills and what you've actually done along your journey have improved or grown or expanded. So to me, that is worth a weight in gold.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any translations of lean leadership in terms of organizational ROI, impact on employee, satisfaction, productivity, efficiency, quality, profitability for the company? Are there any kinds of translations like that that you could share with us?
Yeah, so I think one of the case examples that I provided earlier was on near misses and unsafe acts and unsafe conditions. So this was a lean tool to develop in terms of communication, data analytics, also creating standard work. So essentially, we created a standard process for employees to report unsafe acts and unsafe conditions. Not only did we see through this, I mean, obviously it took some time to adjust and really develop and grow this, but we had done an investment on a tool to help us with this as well through the data analytics piece. And it was going through our A3 and constantly communicating where we're at and here's the problem and where we're working through the root cause and using those different tools. But the lean principles and the leadership aspects were there, focusing on the right things for the right reasons. And what we were able to demonstrate over the course of really over a year and a half is that we could improve our safety by over 30%, just through implementing. And we did a summary and we reflected, what did we change? What did we do?
Mhm.
And it was really through that implementation of the unsafe acts and unsafe conditions. And if you look at all the aspects of lean, we were using data analytics, we were using standard work, we pokey-oked we started out with, I think it was 20 different cards and 20 in multiple languages, and we consolidated that to one standard card, right? So you talk about a lean activity, that was difficult in itself, but just that simple tool to make sure we're talking all the same language, so to speak, and we're all communicating the same thing, and we're looking at the data and we're really focusing on the efforts, we were able to drastically improve, with that safety score. So, to me, that's a win. That's a big win. So,
Mhm. Yeah, and a safety score like that has ripple effects, in terms of waste elimination and value creation and, productivity, efficiency, and so on. I mean, you're getting probably a better quality product out, and like
yeah.
you said, stress on the worker. So the
And
ripple effect of an attainment like that is really significant.
And that's some of the data analytics that I'm speaking about that we're starting to look at now is,
Mhm.
now that we've made this improvement, these changes, where are we seeing this ripple effect within operations, right? And so we're doing a lot of that data analytics right now, And we're leveraging some of the AI for us to help in understanding where's the correlation. And is this something that we can actually use to benchmark in a model moving forward? And in what other ways can we leverage this, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it should be very interesting. Hopefully in a year from now, I can come back and show you a study.
That would be great. Yeah, it'd be great to take a look at that
Yeah.
and talk through that study, Jessica. That would be wonderful. Well, so as a great lean leader, what is the most honest, realistic advice you could give to someone who is just starting in lean leadership or, emerging and practicing it and trying to get better? What's some advice that you would share with your fellow lean leaders?
Don't give up. Don't let people, when they say no, or they, you might get down over some things. And I remember this, I was very green, and getting into lean, and I had just gotten my black belt, but newer into my career at ABB, and I was trying to influence through different tools. I just learned all these great tools, and I'm still learning I was still learning the soft skills part of it, right? And how to apply them. And so I would see an opportunity and I would say, oh, I can help with this. And I was always very energetic on trying to attack or approach a problem, right? And I had some naysayers. And I had some people that are, oh, what do you know? You don't know anything. You're too green at this. You don't know, what you're doing or anything. And don't give up, because that's how you learn. That's how you grow, and that's how you progress. And it's not always going to be easy to do that. It's not always going to be easy to try and use these things, and you will fail. Failure is imminent, but it's critical as a part of you growing and developing. I fail every day, all the time still.
Yeah.
But it's recognizing that, it's like when they tell you that after you hurt after a workout, right? It hurts, but that's weakness leaving the body, right?
Yeah, that's a good
So
thing. That's progress.
that's a good thing. It's progress, right?
That's
So
right.
it's the same thing with lean. You're gonna stumble, you're gonna fall. Don't let it get you
Great.
down.
That's great advice. It's definitely a challenge. You have to make a commitment to it for sure. So, Jessica, in closing with this round two interview, are there any last thoughts you want to leave with us? Anything you want to say as a summarizing thought as we close?
Well, I want to say thank you, because I think with your questions, you've hit on all the elements that I would want to be highlighted. And it's been good for me to reflect back and think about my lean journey and some of the different elements. And I think that's important. I've said this before, but I had a very strong leader say that strategy is like driving a car. You look 90% forward, 10% in the rear view. So always do that, always think that way. And I think you've helped me to do that throughout these sessions. And I think that's an important takeaway for anybody moving forward in this journey.
Well, good. I'm glad it's a reciprocal relationship here. That's the best kind.
Oh, of
Well,
course.
I want to thank you, Jessica, for sharing so much richness around lean leadership. And, you've had a very uh, deep and also, thoughtful journey as you've progressed. And it really is an inspiration to everyone. So everyone, Dr. Jessica Jannaman, thank you, Jessica. And we look forward to talking some more about your study in the future.
Thanks, Dr. Flumerfelt. My pleasure.